Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
As usual, to the papers, and those words by the murdered MP's sister, she was perfect, dominate the Sun on Sunday. The other words come from court and are on every single paper: death to traitors, freedom for Britain. Now, because of legal problems, we can't talk much about this, so you'll have to forgive us. Jo's suspect shocks court, says the Sunday Express, but also, like a lot of Sunday papers, it finally makes up its mind on the Brexit debate, why we must leave the EU, says the Sunday Express. The Sunday Times has come out also for Brexit, but it's nonetheless got David Cameron slightly hedging its bets there, you might think, talking about the dangers of leaving, and there's no way back, he says, and again, death to traitors from Marr on the front page of that. The Sunday Telegraph, which comes out for Brexit, Gove, Brexit won't cause a recession. Michael Gove's given interviews in lots of the papers, and of course we'll be talking to him later on, and there's Jo Cox's parents. We know there are some evil people in this world, but there are an awful lot of good people too. Finally, the Observer there. On the Remain side, it just says Britain splits down the middle as battle resumes over Brexit. And looking at the opinion polls, that does indeed appear to be the case. So let's talk. First of all, Sir Nicholas Soames, you knew Jo Cox a little bit, I think. You met her a few times.
Only slightly, Andrew. I met her as a colleague, really, in the lobbies, and I think Kate was in the same position. We just knew her as a new Member of Parliament. I was immensely impressed by her ability to work across the issues, across party, like Kate and I have done, actually, on immigration and other matters. And if you want to get anything done in the House of Commons, you have to work across party, and she was a doer. I love the story in the Telegraph, I think, last week by Andrew Mitchell in his tribute to her, saying that he took her to see the Russian ambassador to talk about Russia's disgusting behaviour in Syria, and she gave the Russian ambassador a piece of absolute what for, and he was thoroughly chastened by her. She was a very...
And he's a tough guy,
the
Russian ambassador.
He's a tough egg, and she gave him what for. And I'm very taken by the last article she wrote, which was for, which the Mail on Sunday reprints today, in which she talks very eloquently about the Remain campaign, and that was the context in which I met her. We were both members of the cross-party Remain campaign. And I think that she writes very powerfully and very knowledgeably about migrants and the need to curb migrants, but also to do it in a sensible and humane way.
And of course her husband, Brendan, has picked up the torch and is tweeting and writing everywhere as well.
Yes, and I think what was remarkable, at having only been a Member of Parliament for such a short time, she was so well known for the causes that she was working across party on. And I think also what has come through very much, and I think all MPs will be so touched by that, the effect that within her own constituency of her own constituents and the help that she'd given. And it's one of those areas of MPs' lives that get kind of ignored sometimes by the media, that day to day we're all doing, I think, pretty good work, but she particularly seems to in that short time, because she was from the area, it was her home area. So I think it's been I think the papers all have just done some wonderful tributes to her.
I mean, it's interesting, Jane Moore, Sir Nicholas was saying that she was a cross-party kind of MP, and she's got kind of cross-party tributes right across the press.
Absolutely.
Papers of all different views.
As you just said briefly there on the Sun on Sunday, she was perfect, and they're looking, you know, it is the whole thing of she was a human being, and how her sister stood up and made that speech. I mean, all credit to her, absolutely incredible. And you just look at what happens when somebody like that, it's about their parents, their sisters, their siblings, their children. But, as you rightly say, Kate, the constituents, and these pictures here of the absolute sea of flowers. And when she was first killed, the reporters, who normally you get, they do sort of vox pops of people on the streets. People were actually crying. Constituents were crying, and they all had personal stories of how she had helped them. And I think what's happened in politics a lot with the public is that they feel that Westminster is full of careerist politicians that have no...
There's a lot of abuse now about
There's
politicians
a lot of abuse,
all
and I think that Jo Cox and her very tragic story has highlighted, as you rightly say, is that there are a lot of on-the-ground MPs out there doing the job as it should be done.
So, Nicholas, have you noticed a kind of an additional aggression in recent years towards MPs? And how do you deal with this business? You want to go out, you want to meet your constituents, you don't want to be surrounded by police or whatever. You have to be open.
We shall go on advertising surgeries as we always have done, at I hope, reduced rates now. But nevertheless, I think Kate and Jane both make a very important point. You know, an MP's job in his constituency is to be, in his or her constituency, is to be around and about, and constantly around and about. And members of Parliament are, despite what you would think, astonishingly accessible at any time. But it has changed, and public debate has coarsened, and there are a whole lot of events that led up to that, but it's now much rougher than it was. It's always been a rough trade. I mean, go back to Hogarth. It's always been a rough trade, but it is now much more vicious.
And particularly, Kate, I'd say for women. I mean, there was a thing in the Telegraph yesterday listing all the, you know, the rape threats, the death threats made regularly against women MPs on all sides.
Yes, I mean, and that is a result of social media, because it's so instant, and it brings anyone who, if someone says something, everybody else who is interested in that joins in. I just have a view that I just ignore the things that come through, unless it's something that is really, really threatening.
And we should point out, it's not just women MPs, no, it's TV presenters, journalists.
And anyone in public life, you know, I mean, look at the way our nurses sometimes are threatened, our school teachers, you know, it's not just, it's public life.
It's a general coarsening of the public discourse.
And we have to try to change that.
James Kirkup in the Sunday Telegraph there, you've got Kate, saying this is going to divide the country further.
Well, he's trying to move on from that to you know, there'll be a lot of people for different reasons trying to link all of this with the referendum. And I think what this piece is saying by James Kirkup is that it's very, very important for what happens after Thursday, that the tone of the debate is kept in a way that people will not afterwards be able to work together. He says it's the one certainty about the political consequences of Mrs. Cox's awful death. The more it's dragged into the referendum debate, the harder it will be for people divided by that referendum to come back together again afterwards. And I think that's really, really important. You know, there have been...
It's all about tone and so forth.
It's tone, and it's about people respecting other people's views, even if they don't like them.
And Sir Nicholas, talking of respecting other people's views, Michael Gove and you don't exactly share the same view on the EU, but he is about the most courteous man in British politics.
He's the politest man practically I've ever met, and he's also a great friend, and I have great respect for him, and I have great respect. I mean, there are very profound views on both sides of this argument. There's no point in pretending there aren't. That's why it's so difficult for people to come to a conclusion. And I take issue only with this. I've written an article in an interview in the Telegraph today, with Michael Gove, in which he says that a post-Brexit Britain will be a beacon of light. Well, I think Britain is a beacon of light already. I think it's a beacon of light and hope and internationalism and diversity. I think people have always wanted to come here, and they always will want to come here. And I don't think this is something that's going to be caused by Brexit or non-Brexit. I think Britain has been a beacon of hope for generations. And so I hope that when people make their mind up, they'll consider it that it is a finely balanced argument, but it's not a new argument.
And you get people saying to you that you're dishonouring the memory of your grandfather, Sir Winston Churchill, by staying on the Remain side. I mean, you found it pretty heated too.
I find it very heated, and people, they write to me and say, your grandfather would be turning in his grave if he could hear your views. Well, how on earth do they know my grandfather would be turning? It's 50 years since he died. He started his public life charging on a horse at Omdurman with a sword, and ended up as Prime Minister ushering in the nuclear age. It was likely that his views changed very substantially over that period of time, and between then and now, I can't believe that he wouldn't have a very differing view, possibly on what he thought 80 years ago on the potential of the European Union. So I think it's very difficult to say.
Well, so there is Michael Gove. On the other side of the argument, we've got David Cameron, an abject, self-imposed humiliation awaits if this proud, important country walks away, says the Prime Minister, in a paper that disagrees with him.
Yes, but actually,
I could be talking about
yes,
himself.
I mean, I think to be fair, he probably didn't write the headline. But following on really from what Nicholas said, the language is so important. And the thing that I picked out, I mean, obviously he said all the usual things that he's been saying, but the thing I picked out was he was saying there is not one credible voice that says Britain, I think he means the United Kingdom, will be better off for opting to leave the European Union. Is he really saying that you know, those 4 or 5 members of his cabinet who are talking about how we could do so well outside the EU and how it would be much more democratically. Is he saying that they're not credible? You know, I think this is a last gasp attempt by the Prime Minister in a language, I have to say, much less strident than he has been doing recently.
So the language has changed
The
already.
language is changing here, but he's still wrong.
All right.
Well, he's
Okay.
referring to the governor of the Bank of England, the IMF, the OECD, and that these views can't just be
Can
dismissed.
I just say I'm in perfect position on this sofa, dithering in the middle,
You
because
are
that's
a genuine.
exactly.
We have an authentic ditherer.
We have
on
an
the sofa.
authentic ditherer. I am totally on the fence. I remain on the fence, and I'm starting to panic slightly now because obviously I will vote.
Yeah.
And I read an article that says we should remain, and I go, yes, absolutely, we should remain. Then I read an article. But I'm not alone. I wrote this a couple of weeks ago thinking I'm going to get pilloried for this, and I got hundreds of emails from people saying they also are undecided.
We never talk about the don't knows, but there's millions of you, Jane.
But I think,
Now,
I think there are lots of bashful Brexiters.
bashful breakfast.
I think there's lots
Who
of
don't like
bashful
to say
remainers.
that.
Lots of bashful people.
You
Now,
haven't got a good word for that.
if we think our politics are a bit wild at the moment, let's turn to America.
I'm loving this. This is Donald Trump. He's given an interview to the Sunday Times. Putin, Kim, Cameron, I'll talk to them all. He's not talking about Kim Kardashian, I would just like to point out. He's talking about Kim Jong-un, of course, of North Korea. And everything he's asked by the journalist Alan Friedman, I think he's had media training. He's suddenly become very measured and, you know, not pejorative at all. Asked about David Cameron's view, where, of course, David Cameron said that he was divisive, stupid and wrong for saying he was going to ban all Muslims from coming into America. His reply is, I respect David Cameron. He doesn't know me, but I respect him. I respect what he has done and what he is doing, and I imagine we will have a very good relationship if I am successful.
Preparing
Media
himself for
training
power.
is
Preparing
working.
himself for
Yes.
power. Now, sentences you don't expect to say on television. Sir Nicholas Soames has been looking at China Daily on his iPad.
I have. China Daily's interview with the great Ken Clarke, who rather sadly announces in this interview formally, which I hadn't heard formally before, that he's going to stand down at this election.
This is news,
At the end of this election. You know, and he became a member of Parliament in 1976. He's been through all this. He's been round the track on endless occasions. He is a staunch pro-European supporter of great experience and knowledge. And interestingly enough, the piece to the China Daily is really about the complexities of trade with China and the point that although whatever one says of the rights or wrongs of this argument, I mean, putting together a trade deal with anyone is not an easy thing, and making the point that to put together a trade deal with Britain alone with China is going to be very complicated. But I think the notable point is that he has finally announced that he's going, and that will be a big loss to Parliament, a big, clever, experienced man.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about another experienced and clever man in a totally different world, Tim Peake,
Yes.
who has fallen to earth.
If you had spent the amount of time that he has spent in space eating sort of air-dried food out of packets with boiling water poured on them, what would you crave most? Well, for me, it would be a big juicy steak and a glass of red wine. But no, pizza, apparently. Tim Peake would like, he's been craving pizza.
Pizza and a beer.
Pizza and a nice
A
cold
thorough
beer.
Englishman.
I'm sort of with him on the nice cold beer, but not the pizza.
I thought it was very funny to hear earlier this morning, I was telling Jane of another man who'd been on the shuttle, an American spaceman, who said that he came down, the only thing he wanted, he'd been dreaming about eating salad. Well, I mean, the poor sap. I mean, that really isn't much to look forward to. But I love this thing that he landed, and the first thing he said, which I thought was really charming, was the fresh air.
Yeah.
The
And
smell
to smell
of
the
planet
flowers
Earth.
and the fresh air, and after being 6 months in a spacecraft, it must be an extraordinary moment. And I'm amazed that the effect of gravity wearing off, it must be quite a thing, and he's on his way back to see his family now, so well done him.
And, of course, he's got back just in time for Father's Day. There's a lot of Father's Day comment in the papers today.
Yes, there is, and there's actually a short article in the Sunday Express written by the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, and he's talking about celebrating his 3rd Father's Day as a dad. But it is actually a very interesting article because he talks quite strongly again, and it shows his real determination to keep pushing the whole question of mental health and the idea that the importance of having more resources into that whole area, and I think that will strike a chord with a lot of people. But he's also pointing out that dads dads are actually very important. And I think for some young men that I see in my constituency, you know, sometimes young men feel devalued. They feel that no one really is interested in them. And I think it's a very
of the
important
father
issue.
figure.
Yeah.
And Sarah Baxter, rather movingly in the Sunday Times,
Yes,
has written about
a
that.
father's belief is what a girl makes a girl fly high. It's a fantastic piece, but it's quite curious because she actually starts it off saying he wasn't around much because my parents split up when I was 9 and his job as a pilot took him away. But she does go on to say he brought her...
had a belief in her, that was the point.
Exactly,
Yes,
and he brought her up to believe that she could do anything. But obviously her mother played a very strong role as well. And I didn't have a father figure in my life. You know, my mother did everything. And single parents of equal, either gender can do both, of course. But yes, no, my husband has a very strong relationship with our children, and I do think, you know, fathers are very, very important.
I noticed one of the other Father's Day stories in the paper was Leonard Cohen's son saying what he really valued about his father was that he made a very good tuna salad. I hope when I go, my kids will be saying, well, he did make quite a good tuna salad.
2 mentions of salad in a paper review.
yeah.
Who knew?
Indeed.
Monstrous thought.
Monstrous thought. So, Nicholas, are you going to get a large bottle of something good and a cake for Father's Day, do you
Well,
think?
I hope so, if my children remember. But I hope they will. After all the publicity there's been, I'm quite sure they will.
There are a lot of people rushing out to the shops, yeah.
All right, well, listen, that's been very interesting. Thanks to all of you today. Good paper review.